I'm Sam, and this is the story of how my wife thought she could outsmart me. It started with whispers that slid through the dark, strange bank transactions I had never made, and a name, Elias Monroe, that I'd never heard before. Diana, my wife, wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to strip me bare, taking everything we had built together. But she underestimated me. She thought I would crumble. Instead, I moved first. I protected what was mine, and exactly 1 week later, her entire scheme collapsed like a brittle house of cards. But what hurt even more than her betrayal was realizing just how long she had been planning it, how many lies she had told, how far she was willing to go to destroy me. I woke up to find the other side of the bed empty, the sheets beside me cold and untouched. At first, I thought she must have gone to the bathroom or slipped out to get a glass of water. But as I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I caught the faintest sound of her voice. Low, careful, conspiratorial. The hallway was dark, but a sliver of moonlight crept through the window, spilling across the floor like a silent warning. My stomach twisted painfully as I followed the sound, moving silently, every nerve on edge. Just a little longer. Diana's voice drifted from the darkness, velvet soft. He doesn't suspect anything yet. I froze mid-step, breath catching in my throat. My heart pounded, so loud I was sure she could hear it. Who the hell was she talking to? I strained to hear more, but the rest of her words were swallowed by shadows too hushed to catch. The tone of her voice, though low, intimate, was unmistakable. My hands curled into fists. This wasn't a late-night work call. Diana never whispered on work calls. Hell, she never even cared if I overheard her conversations before. My mind raced, conjuring possibilities each more sickening than the last. Then came the soft creak of approaching footsteps. I darted back to the bedroom, sliding under the covers just moments before she rounded the corner. My pulse thundered in my ears as I fought to keep my breathing slow, steady, natural. The mattress dipped as she climbed back into bed beside me, her movements calm, unhurried. A minute passed, then another. She exhaled slowly, settling in like nothing had happened. I turned toward her, blinking groggily. "Where were you?" My voice was soft, hoarse with fake sleep. "Bathroom," she murmured without hesitation. A lie. And the phone call? I pressed gently. She barely missed a beat. Just a client. Needed to smooth out some details for a case. I stared at her, searching for any crack in her armor. She met my gaze, serene and unreadable. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it really had been work. But that whisper, "He doesn't suspect anything yet," echoed louder in my mind with every beat of my heart. I swallowed down the doubt, forcing myself to roll over, forcing myself to pretend it was nothing. Not tonight. Not yet. The truth would come soon enough. The next morning, I woke before Diana. She was still asleep, one arm sprawled across the pillow where my head should have been, her breathing deep and even. I slipped quietly out of bed, grabbing my phone from the nightstand and padding barefoot into the kitchen. The tile was cold against my skin, the early morning light muted and gray. Normally, I didn't check our bank accounts. Diana handled most of the finances, and until now, I had never thought to question it, but something inside me, something cold and insistent, urged me on. I opened the banking app and scrolled through the recent transactions. My blood chilled. $500, $200, $750, $2,000, small withdrawals. Individually, not enough to raise alarms, but together, patterned, frequent, they formed a trail of betrayal. We shared expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, but we also maintained separate accounts for personal spending. This was something else entirely. These weren't investments. These weren't bills. These were secrets written in numbers. I gripped my phone tighter, the edges biting into my palm. Behind me, Footsteps creaked. I locked the screen in an instant and turned. Diana stood in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep rubbing the back of her neck. "Morning," she mumbled, her voice thick with feigned innocence. "What's for breakfast?" I forced a casual smile. "I was about to ask you the same thing." She smirked, stepping forward to pour herself a cup of coffee, moving as if the walls weren't closing in around her. "Guess it's your turn then," she said, sipping leisurely. I watched her carefully, every breath, every flicker of her eyes. "I checked our bank account this morning," I said, setting my phone down carefully on the counter. For a fraction of a second, she froze. Her hand tightened imperceptibly around the mug. Then came the laugh. Light, airy, manufactured. "Oh?" she said, turning to face me. "There are a lot of small withdrawals," I said calmly. "Things I don't recognize." She barely blinked. "Just small investments," she said with an easy shrug. "Business opportunities. Nothing major." She spoke too quickly, smiled too easily. She was lying. And the worst part? She didn't even respect me enough to lie well. The rest of the day passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Diana was glued to her phone, slipping away to take calls behind closed doors. Whenever she placed her phone down, it was always face down, a wall between us, sleek and black. I tried to shake the unease, but it clung to me like a second skin. Every glance she spared me, every casual babe or honey, felt like an insult painted in bright colors. That night, lying beside her in the darkness, I stared at the ceiling, wide-eyed. The walls of our bedroom loomed heavy and silent, holding all the words I couldn't say. Turned to face her. She slept soundly, her breathing soft and even, her face a portrait of peace. But I wasn't fooled. A single thought dug its claws deep into my mind. Am I being paranoid? Or is something truly terribly wrong? The question festered unanswered as the hours dragged by and dawn crept across the city skyline. By morning, the doubt had rooted itself so deep within me that even sunlight filtering through the windows couldn't dislodge it. I moved through my routine like a ghost, showering, dressing, sipping coffee. But my mind was a swirling storm, locked onto one thing. What was Diana hiding? Across the kitchen, she sat scrolling through her phone, looking every bit the picture of ease and normalcy. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. But then, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she spoke. "Hey, babe," she said, voice light as air. "We should probably get our financials in order, just in case something happens." I blinked, my grip tightening slightly around my coffee cup. "Our financials?" I asked carefully. "Yeah," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's smart to have everything listed out. Accounts, passwords, assets. Keep it all in one place. For emergencies." She sipped her coffee, her face the picture of casual suggestion. But underneath I saw it, the glint of calculation in her eyes, sharp and fleeting. Diana had never shown the slightest interest in my personal accounts before. Sure, we managed. Joint expenses together, the mortgage, the bills. But our personal savings had always been separate, an unspoken agreement. I forced a slow nod, masking the churn of suspicion in my gut. "I guess I could put something together," I said casually. She smiled, quick and bright. Too bright. She moved on to another topic immediately, chatting about the weather, about dinner plans, about anything but the mountain she was trying to quietly move under my feet. But I wasn't listening anymore. I sat there, my mind ticking like a bomb, realizing the horrifying truth. This wasn't about being prepared. This wasn't about emergencies. This was strategy. This was setup. Diana was getting ready to make her move. That evening, she was unusually affectionate, curling up beside me on the couch, laughing at the television, slipping her arm through mine. It was almost perfect. Almost. But perfection, like all illusions, has tiny cracks. And when she got up to take a shower, she did something she hadn't done in weeks. She left her phone unattended, face down on the coffee table. I stared at it, my pulse quickening, a drumbeat against my ribs. The screen remained dark for a moment, silent, taunting. And then, as if summoned by fate itself, a notification flickered to life. A text message from a name I didn't recognize. Elias Monroe. My breath caught. My hand moved before my mind could stop it, tilting the phone just enough to read the preview. Just make sure he stays in the dark. Almost there. The words struck like lightning, burning through the fog of my doubts. The room spun slightly as adrenaline surged through my veins. Who was Elias Monroe? What did almost there mean? My mind flooded with images. Betrayal, theft, destruction, all swirling under Diana's careful, smiling facade. I heard the water shut off upstairs. Panic slammed into me. I replaced the phone exactly as it had been, every muscle in my body taut and trembling, and sank back into the couch, willing my breathing to steady. A minute later, Diana strolled back in, towel drying her hair, humming under her breath. She scooped up her phone without a glance, unlocking it with a few swift taps, completely unaware that her secret had slipped through the cracks. "Did you decide on dinner?" she asked breezily, settling beside me. I swallowed hard. "Not yet," I murmured. She scrolled through her phone as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I spent the rest of the evening trapped inside my own mind, trying desperately to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe Elias was a client. Maybe keeping me in the dark was about a surprise party or a gift but no, I knew better. The pieces were clicking together faster than I could deny them. The money disappearing, the secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in my accounts, the calculated affection. I should have confronted her right then and there. I should have demanded answers. But if Diana was hiding something this big, if she was orchestrating an entire betrayal behind my back, then I needed more than just suspicions. I needed proof. Real proof. So instead I smiled. I kissed her goodnight. I slipped beneath the covers beside her, pretending. And in the darkness, as she drifted into peaceful, practiced sleep, I whispered into the night, "Who the hell is Elias Monroe?" The next morning, the name Elias Monroe was all I could think about. It hovered over my head like a storm cloud, following me from room to room, refusing to dissolve. I moved through my morning routine, shaving, dressing, pouring coffee, but my mind was locked in a loop. Diana sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, the very picture of nonchalance. She didn't even glance up when I entered. She didn't have to. She thought she had already won. I sat across from her, studying, her like an archaeologist piecing together a broken civilization. And then, as if on cue, she struck again. "Hey, babe," she said lightly, smiling without looking up. "Can you sign something real quick?" The words, so casual, so offhand, made my skin prickle. "Sign what?" I asked, keeping my tone airy, detached. She pulled a few pages from a manila folder and slid them across the table. "Just some financial updates for tax purposes," she said with a shrug, twirling her coffee spoon absent-mindedly. I picked up the papers, my stomach nodding. The first few pages were dense with legal jargon, but the intent was clear enough. By the time I reached the last page, my hands were shaking. Property transfer agreement. If I signed everything, the condo, the shared investments, even parts of my personal savings, would transfer solely into Diana's name. The air around me thickened, turned heavy. I looked up at her. She smiled sweetly, sipping her coffee as if she hadn't just handed me my own noose. "Diana," I said slowly, placing the papers back on the table. "What is this?" She laughed, a light, airy sound that barely masked the tension beneath it. "It's just a precaution, babe. Legal convenience. Nothing changes between us." My pulse thundered in my ears. "Nothing changes?" I echoed. "You're asking me to sign over everything to you." "Not everything," she said smoothly, her eyes glinting. "Just consolidating, protecting what we've built, in case, life happens." My hands tightened around the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. I forced a small, almost amused smile. I'm not signing this. Her expression tightened, just for a split second, before she covered it with a dismissive chuckle. Sam, don't be dramatic, it's just paperwork. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my posture relaxed even as every muscle in my body screamed. Then why? I said softly. Are you so eager for me to sign it without even reading it properly? A flicker crossed her face. Irritation, maybe, or something darker. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping into a tone laced with warning. You really don't want to make this harder than it needs to be, Sam. I met her gaze head-on. Unflinching. Is that a threat, Diana? For a long, brittle moment, we simply stared at each other. Then with a small, almost pitying smile, she leaned back, folding her arms. I'm just saying, she said, voice sugar-sweet and poison-tipped. You're making this a lot messier than it has to be. I didn't reply. I let the silence stretch between us, thick and suffocating, and when I saw the slight twitch in her jaw, the impatient tapping of her fingers against her coffee cup, I knew. She was the one starting to panic now. I rose from the table slowly, gathering the papers into a neat stack. You're right, I said lightly. I'll think about it. I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting there, but I didn't miss the way her eyes narrowed as she watched me go. I had flipped the board without her realizing it. Now I was the one making the next move. That night, Diana acted like nothing had happened. She floated through the house, humming softly, sipping wine, flipping through television channels with lazy indifference. She laughed at sitcom jokes. She ordered takeout, suggesting my favorite dishes. She even curled against me on the couch, tracing idle circles on my arm as if we were just another happy couple winding down another normal day. It was a performance so perfect it made my skin crawl, because now I could see the edges of her mask, the cracks beneath the glossy surface. Something had shifted. Not in me. In her. Every move was too polished, every smile too rehearsed. And I knew, she was playing for time, weaving the final threads of her plan. Hours passed in that false calm, and then it happened. Diana stood up casually, announcing she was going to take a shower. Her phone, the lifeline to all her secrets, was left on the coffee table. Alone. Face down, as always. I stared at it, heart hammering, as the sound of running water filled the silent house. I knew I had seconds, maybe a minute at most. My hand moved instinctively, tilting the phone just slightly to check for notifications. Nothing. And then, like a whisper from the universe, it vibrated. Another message from Elias Monroe. I swallowed hard, adrenaline surging. I didn't dare unlock it. Diana would notice. But the preview told me enough. Almost ready. She won't know what hit her. Every cell in my body screamed. She, not he. She. Was Diana not just betraying me financially? Was she plotting something bigger, a setup, a ruinous, crushing blow? I placed the phone back with surgical precision and sank into the couch just as I heard the water shut off. Moments later, Diana floated back into the room, her hair wrapped in a towel, her robe cinched loosely around her waist. She smiled that same easy, hollow smile, picking up her phone without a second glance. Did you decide on dinner? She asked lightly, scrolling. Not yet, I said, my voice perfectly steady. Inside, I was drowning. I spent the rest of the night tangled in my own thoughts, weaving every piece of the puzzle together. The secret transactions, the sudden obsession with my financials, the late night whispering, the staged affection, the name, Elias Monroe, appearing again and again like a stain that wouldn't wash out. And now, the certainty that whatever Diana and Elias were planning, it wasn't just about leaving me. It was about destroying me. But if they thought I was going to sit quietly, hand over everything, and vanish from my own life, they had made a fatal miscalculation. I needed to act. But I needed proof first. Real, irrefutable courtroom proof. That night, as Diana slept soundly beside me, her breathing deep and even, I lay wide awake staring at the ceiling. I wasn't going to be their victim. No, I was going to be their reckoning. Morning arrived, heavy and gray. The unease from the night before clung to my skin, soaked into my bones. I moved through the apartment mechanically, brushing my teeth, dressing, brewing coffee. But every action felt detached, as if I were observing myself from a distance. Across the kitchen, Diana sat at the counter, scrolling, her phone with infuriating ease. She looked up and smiled, that bright, hollow smile, as if she hadn't spent the past few months quietly dismantling my life. "Morning, babe," she said sweetly, reaching for her coffee. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Morning." I sat down across from her, my mind already racing 3 steps ahead. I needed to act. Now, before she tightened the noose any further. I stirred my coffee, feigning casualness, as she set her phone aside and pulled a stack of papers from her bag. "Was thinking," she said lightly. "Maybe today we could finalize that financial list. You know, just in case anything ever happens." Her voice was velvet, her movements fluid, a masterclass in subtle manipulation. I took a slow sip of coffee, buying time. "Yeah, maybe," I said, pretending to consider. Inside, I was on fire, because I had already made my move. Last night, while she slept, I had shifted my personal assets into a private trust, separate, sealed, untouchable, and without access to my passwords. No matter how sweetly she asked, she wouldn't find a single crack, not now, not ever. "I'll pull some things together later," I added smoothly. She smiled again, but this time there was a flicker, so faint most people would have missed it. A tightening around her mouth, a quick dart of her eyes to the clock. She was nervous. Good. Let the conversation drift elsewhere, weekend plans, grocery lists, trivialities, letting her think I was none the wiser. But in my mind, I was already building my defense, already plotting my counterattack. That evening, Diana was all smiles, and soft laughter again as if nothing had changed. She suggested wine with dinner. She curled against me on the couch. She kissed my cheek, lingering sweetly. It was a symphony of false intimacy, and she played it perfectly. But I no longer heard the music. I saw the strings. Hours later, when she claimed she was exhausted and slipped away to bed early, I stayed, up, pretending to be engrossed in some mindless TV show. Once I heard her breathing shift into the heavy rhythm of sleep, I moved quietly, methodically. I pulled out my laptop, connecting to secure accounts, double-checking the protections I had already put in place. Banking, property titles, investments, all safe, all shielded. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore, I was laying traps of my own. Because when Diana finally made her move, and she would soon, she wouldn't find a vault full of riches waiting for her. She'd find a battlefield, and I would be standing at the center, ready. Before shutting down my computer, I opened a blank document. No title, no formatting, just a simple blank page, and across the top, I typed 4 words: "Prepare for the war." The next morning, the tension was almost tangible. Even the air felt heavier, thicker, as if the walls themselves were bracing for the inevitable. I found Diana in the living room, sitting calmly with a cup of coffee in hand, scrolling idly through her phone. She looked up as I entered, her face composed, her eyes unreadable. She set her cup down with deliberate slowness. "Sam," she said, her voice falsely soft. "We need to talk." There it was. I moved to sit across from her, my expression neutral, my hand steady even as my pulse drummed like war drums under my skin. I tilted my head slightly. "Oh," I said, feigning mild curiosity. Diana exhaled slowly, as if this decision weighed heavily on her who 2014 A's if she were the one being wronged. "I think we should separate," she said, the words sharp, practiced, final. She delivered the line like a closing argument, each syllable neat and bloodless. I didn't react. I didn't flinch. Instead, I let the silence stretch. A long, empty beat, then another, until she shifted slightly in her seat, uneasy under the weight of my stillness. Finally, I spoke. "You've been planning this for a while, haven't you?" I asked quietly. A flicker of something. U-2014 guilt, perhaps, or annoyance. U-2014 passed across her face, gone in an instant. She straightened her shoulders. "It's for the best, Sam. We've grown apart." I almost laughed. Grown apart? That was the story she was going with? I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on my thighs, staring her straight in the eyes. "You mean you want out?" I said calmly. "But you want to make sure you don't leave empty-handed." Her jaw tightened, just barely, but she didn't deny it. She didn't even try. For a moment, the mask slipped, and beneath it, I glimpsed the cold calculation that had been guiding her all along. I could have exploded then. I could have thrown. The table across the room shouted every accusation burning in my chest. But I didn't. Because something inside me had shifted too. I wasn't the same man she thought she was playing. Instead, I leaned back, letting a slow, knowing smile curve my lips. "I already moved my assets," I said quietly. Her entire posture stiffened. She blinked once, slow, disbelieving, like someone watching their tower of cards collapse in slow motion. "What do you mean?" she asked too quickly. Her voice was still, calm, but the edges were fraying. "Exactly what it sounds like," I said smoothly. "Everything I own is protected. You won't touch a dime." The silence that followed was dense, electric. Diana's jaw clenched, her hands curled into tight fists on her lap. She had spent months, maybe longer, laying the groundwork for this betrayal. Every smile, every kiss, every late-night whisper a calculated move on her twisted chessboard, but she had underestimated her opponent. And now she realized it. Finally, she stood up sharply, grabbing her coffee with unnecessary force. She took a long sip, composing herself, masking the fury that simmered just beneath the surface. When she turned back to me, her smile was back, but it was different now. Brittle, venomous. "You're going to regret this, Sam," she said, her voice low and dangerous. I met her gaze evenly. For the first time in months, I felt something new. Not fear, not doubt. Power. "We'll see," I said quietly. She stormed from the room without another word, and for the first time since that awful whisper in the night, I allowed myself a real smile. She thought she had ended the war with that declaration, but the truth was simple. The real war had just begun. The morning air felt heavier than usual, moved through my routine in slow, mechanical motions. Coffee, shower, the rustle of papers on the kitchen table. But a tension thrummed just beneath my skin, coiling tighter with every breath. I told myself I wouldn't let Diana's parting threat get under my skin. "You're going to regret this, Sam." An empty warning, I told myself, a desperate bluff. But then came the knock. Sharp, measured, official. I set my coffee down, exhaling slowly before crossing to the door. On the other side stood a man in a navy blazer, holding a thick envelope in one hand. "Sam Keller?" he asked, his voice brisk and emotionless. I nodded, my stomach sinking. He extended the envelope toward me. "You've been served." I stood there for a moment, the weight of the envelope like a brick in my hand, watching him walk away without a second glance. I already knew what it was before I even opened it. Still, with deliberate movements, I carried it to the kitchen table, slid a finger under the seal, and pulled the contents free. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I skimmed the documents, my pulse thundering louder with each word. And there it was, in black and white. Diana was demanding half of everything. The condo, the car, 50% of all shared. Assets ends U-2014 because apparently betrayal wasn't quite enough, U-2014 spousal support. I laughed. A dry, bitter sound that filled the empty room. Of course she thought she could still win. Of course she thought she could take me for everything I had left. Because the Diana I once loved, the woman I had trusted with my life, was gone. And standing, in her place, was a stranger wearing her smile. Later that afternoon, I sat across from my attorney, Patricia, in her sleek downtown office. The smell of polished wood and fresh ink filled the air as she flipped through the papers, a small smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "Well," she said, tapping her manicured nails against the desk, "it looks like Diana is about to be very disappointed." I raised a brow. "Just like that?" I asked. Patricia nodded, almost amused. "Just like that," she confirmed. "You moved your assets into a trust before she filed. Legally, she has no access to any of it." Relief washed through me, slow and seeping, unwinding the tension that had been coiled in my chest for days. Patricia leaned back, steepling her fingers. "She can fight for spousal support," she continued. "But given the income history we have, and her own records, it's not likely she'll get a penny." I exhaled, the smallest hint of a smile ghosting across my lips. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly, completely in control. That evening, just as twilight began to stretch its long fingers across the city skyline, the front door slammed, open. I didn't flinch. Diana stormed inside, fury radiating from her in palpable waves. Her hair was wind-tossed, her cheeks flushed with rage. She dropped her bag onto the floor with a heavy thud. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" She spat, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I remained seated, calmly sipping my wine, savoring the rich bitterness that seemed to echo the moment perfectly. I set the glass down gently before meeting her gaze. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm finally protecting myself." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, trembling with fury. "You planned this," she hissed. I shrugged, the gesture almost lazy. "Funny," I said softly. "I could say the same about you." For a heartbeat, the only sound between us was the shallow rush of our breathing. Then, with a cold, bitter laugh, she shook her head. "This isn't over, Sam," she whispered, her voice low and venomous. I smiled. Small, knowing. "No," I said quietly. "It's just beginning." For a few days after the confrontation, the world around me seemed almost eerily calm. Too calm. I moved through my routines cautiously, never letting my guard down, waiting for the next blow. Because men like me, men who know betrayal when they taste it, learn quickly that silence is not peace. It's only the inhale before the scream. The first sign came at work. It wasn't obvious at first. Just small things, a look that lingered too long, whispers that died the moment I entered a room. Colleagues who once greeted me warmly now offered tight, polite smiles. By mid-morning, my assistant, Rachel, knocked on my office door, her expression tight with worry. "Hey, Sam," she said, stepping in and closing the door behind her. "I think you should know. There's a rumor going around." I set my pen down slowly. "What kind of rumor?" She hesitated, wringing her hands. "That you..." She swallowed hard. "That you took money from the joint accounts. That you were laundering funds." I stared at her, stunned into silence. The words landed like a slap. "I don't believe it," Rachel added quickly. "But, well, Diana's been talking. To lawyers, to mutual friends. It's spreading." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment before forcing myself to focus. Of course, Diana wasn't just trying to take my money, she was trying to destroy my name. I clenched my fists under the desk. This wasn't just a divorce. It was war. That afternoon, I found myself once again seated across from Patricia in her office. The city buzzed beyond the glass windows, but here inside, it felt like a vacuum. Silent, heavy. I slammed a folder full of printed screenshots onto her desk, my hands trembling, slightly from fury. "This needs to stop," I said, voice tight. Patricia calmly flipped through the pages, messages, social media posts, whispered accusations. She gave a dry, almost amused chuckle. "Well," she said, "looks like Diana's getting desperate." "This is slander," I said. "She's painting me as a criminal." Patricia leaned back, studying me with sharp, calculating eyes. "Yes," she said. "And that's exactly what we needed." I frowned. She smiled. "If she's spreading false claims," Patricia continued, "we can hit her with defamation, and if she ignores a cease and desist, we escalate to full damages." I inhaled deeply, the rage inside me settling into something colder, more focused. "I don't want to drag this through court for years," I muttered. "I just want her to stop." Patricia leaned forward, her voice lower, more personal. "Sam," she said, "listen carefully. This isn't about her anymore. This is about control. She wants you to react emotionally. She wants you to panic. You do that. She wins." I pressed my hands, flat against the desk, grounding myself. Patricia was right. I couldn't let Diana dictate my next move. I had to be smarter, sharper, deadlier. That night, I found Diana exactly where I expected her to be, sitting in the city's most exclusive restaurant, laughing over cocktails with two of our former mutual friends. I didn't cause a scene, didn't even approach directly. Instead, as I passed their table, I leaned in just close enough for only Diana to hear, my voice a blade wrapped in velvet. "You have no idea what you've just started." Her laughter faltered mid-breath. For a split second, I saw the truth flash across her face. Fear. She masked it quickly, covering with a smug smile, but I had already seen it, and that was enough. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to beg. I simply walked away, leaving her sitting there, surrounded by the ashes of her carefully constructed lies. She had fired the first shot, but she had no idea what was coming next. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in the cold, cavernous space of a courtroom, staring across the polished floor at Diana. She was dressed impeccably, of course, hair perfectly coiffed, tailored suit sharp enough to cut. But her eyes told a different story. Nervous, calculating, cornered. She thought this was her final move, that this was her moment to deliver the killing blow. Her lawyer stood first, confidence oozing from every polished word. "Your Honor, my client has reason to believe that Mr. Keller improperly moved marital assets to avoid a fair divorce settlement. We are requesting a full forensic audit of all financial transactions made in the past 6 months." I didn't react. Sat perfectly still, feeling Patricia rise smoothly beside me. She adjusted her glasses with a calm so absolute it made the room itself seem to pause. "Your Honor," she began, her voice cool and measured, "all of my client's financial transfers were conducted legally and before any divorce proceedings were filed. There is no evidence whatsoever of mismanagement or fraud." She slid a thick binder forward, its edges bristling with color-coded tabs. "Furthermore, we move to dismiss this motion with prejudice and request that Mr. Keller's legal fees for this hearing be covered by the opposing party, as this request is a blatant attempt at financial harassment." The judge, an older man with tired eyes and a sharp mind, leaned forward, flipping through the documents. The room held its breath. Across from me, Diana tried to maintain her poise, but I saw the way her fingers drummed nervously against the table, saw the way her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. 5 minutes stretched into an eternity. Then finally the judge looked up. "The court finds no grounds for a full forensic audit," he said crisply. "The motion is denied." He lifted his gavel and brought it down with a decisive crack. Furthermore, due to the lack of evidence and the unnecessary burden placed on the court, the petitioner U 2014 M's, Keller EU 2014 I's, hereby ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by Mr. Keller in relation to this claim. The words settled over the room like ash. It was done. Diana had lost, completely. Outside the courtroom, I walked past her without a word. But as I brushed by, she couldn't help herself. She muttered, just loud enough for me to hear, "You think this is over? Just wait." I didn't slow down. I didn't turn around. Because I knew the truth. Men like me, men who had clawed themselves back from betrayal, didn't need to gloat. We didn't need to threaten. We simply waited. Because people like Diana, they always destroyed themselves in the end. I didn't have to wait long for Diana's next move. It came the very next morning. A call from Patricia, sharp and urgent. "Sam," she said, her voice tight. "We have a problem." My stomach dropped. "What, now?" I asked, already bracing myself. There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling on her end. "Diana and Elias Monroe have filed a formal complaint," she said. "They're accusing you of financial fraud." I gripped the phone tighter, feeling the edges bite into my palm. "Fraud?" I echoed. "According to their evidence," Patricia continued, "you've been falsifying financial records for months." The world tilted slightly, the ground slipping beneath me. If this accusation stuck, it wouldn't just cost me money. It could destroy my career, my reputation, my future. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. "Are the documents real?" I asked. Patricia snorted. "Not even close," she said. "But they're good. Someone went to a lot of trouble forging them. Very professional." Of course, Elias Monroe. The invisible hand behind Diana's every calculated move. But Patricia wasn't finished. "I had Beatrix, our forensic analyst, take a look at them before I called you," she said. "And she found something. A flicker of hope." "What?" "The timestamps on the financial transfers," Patricia said. "They're fake. Someone doctored them. And more importantly, the accounts they supposedly reference? They didn't even exist when those transactions supposedly took place." A slow, burning exhale escaped my lungs. There it was. Their fatal mistake, their desperation, their undoing. My fear burned away, replaced by something sharper, more lethal. Resolve. They wanted a war? Fine. I would give them one. And I would end it. That afternoon, I sat across from Patricia in her office, the city skyline stretching out behind her like a battlefield waiting for the final charge. She slid a thick folder across the desk toward me. "We're not just defending anymore," she said, her voice crisp. "We're going on the offensive." I opened the folder, scanning through the meticulously compiled evidence, forged documents, fake timestamps, fabricated account numbers. All of it tied back to Diana and Elias. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "We're filing a motion proving the fraud," she said, "and we're countersuing them for defamation and falsifying legal evidence." I nodded slowly, feeling the pieces click into place inside me. "And I want full damages," I said quietly. "Every last penny." Patricia smiled. "A sharp, dangerous thing." "Good," she said, "because we have enough to bury them." 2 weeks later, we faced off in court again. Diana sat rigid beside her lawyer, her face pale, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles gleamed white. Elias was there too, lurking behind her like a shadow given form. Patricia moved with the calm precision of a surgeon. She laid out the case step by step, how the documents had been doctored, how the fake transactions couldn't have occurred because the accounts didn't exist, how the entire accusation was a desperate fabrication. The forensic analyst took the stand, detailing every flaw, every inconsistency, every lie. Across the courtroom, Diana's lawyer squirmed visibly, and then Patricia delivered the final blow. She slid a second folder onto the judge's bench. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and lethal, "in light of these fraudulent accusations, my client is countersuing Ms. Keller and her associate Mr. Monroe for defamation and the submission of falsified legal evidence." The silence that followed was so thick it felt almost physical. Diana's lawyer leaned over, whispering furiously in her ear. Diana's face crumbled. Finally, her lawyer stood, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Your Honor, my client wishes to withdraw her claims." Of course she did. She had no choice. The judge nodded solemnly. Motion dismissed. Defendants to cover all legal costs. The gavel came down with a satisfying finality. Just like that, they were finished. Outside the courtroom, I didn't even look at Diana as I passed her. But just before stepping into the sunlight, I paused, turned slightly, and said, just loud enough for her to hear, "Are we done here?" For the first time, Diana had no response. No threat, no smile, nothing, just silence. The sweetest sound I had heard in months. 2 days after the courtroom victory, I sat once again across from Patricia. The light from the setting sun poured into her office, staining everything gold and warm, a stark contrast to the months of cold battles we had fought through. She slid a final stack of documents across the polished desk toward me. "It's done," she said simply. I stared at the papers for a long moment, almost unable to believe it. The settlement agreement. Signed, sealed, final. I exhaled slowly, letting the breath carry away months of fear, anger, and exhaustion. With careful fingers, I picked up the top page and scanned it. As I already knew, Diana got nothing. Not a dime. Not the condo. Not the car. Not even a token settlement to salve her wounded pride. Her financial claims were dismissed. Her defamation case backfired spectacularly. Her reputation, once polished and enviable, lay in ruins at her feet. Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying me. "How do you feel?" she asked. I let out a soft, almost disbelieving laugh. It wasn't loud or triumphant, it wasn't bitter. It was quiet, simple, relief, freedom, lighter, I said, smiling genuinely for the first time in what felt like years. She nodded, satisfaction glinting in her sharp eyes. "Good," she said. "You deserve that." I stood, slipping the documents into my bag. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, extending my hand. "For everything." She shook it firmly, her grip strong. "Go enjoy your life, Sam," she said. "You've earned it." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed her. That evening, my mother insisted on a small victory dinner at her house. The moment I stepped inside, Margot enveloped me in a tight, warm hug, the kind only mothers can give, the kind that makes you feel for a few blessed moments like everything really will be okay. "It's over," she whispered. "Yes," I murmured back. "It is." Beatrix, Patricia's forensic expert and now a close friend, raised a glass of champagne with a mischievous grin. "To freedom," she toasted, "and to never letting anyone think they can outsmart Sam Keller again." I laughed, the sound easy, unburdened. "I'll drink to that," I said, clinking my glass against hers. We ate, we talked. We remembered who I used to be, and who I had fought to become. And for the first time in so long, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder. I wasn't bracing for the next betrayal. The war was over, and I had won. Later that night, I stood alone on the balcony of my apartment overlooking the city skyline. The light stretched infinitely before me, a living, breathing testament to resilience. Everything felt different. The air, the silence, my own heartbeat. I wasn't the man who had ignored the warning signs anymore. I wasn't the man who had believed in the illusion of safety, of permanence, of unconditional trust. I had lost things along the way. Trust, time, the version of love I once clung to, but I had gained something far more valuable. Clarity, strength, freedom. My phone buzzed softly on the table beside me. An unknown number. I didn't hesitate. Blocked. I turned back to the night, the city's endless, lights reflected in my glass. I opened my laptop. A blank document glowed on the screen. A new beginning. My story. One I would write myself this time. No ghosts, no shadows dictating the script. I set my fingers against the keys and whispered into the quiet. This is my story now. Before I end this chapter of my life, there's something I want to leave you with. Something I learned in the fire. Life has a way of testing us in the moments we least expect. Sometimes it isn't the strangers who betray us. It's the ones we let closest. The ones we believed in without question. The ones who smiled at us while quietly sharpening their knives. But here's the truth they don't tell you. Strength isn't about never being betrayed. It's about what you do afterward. It's about standing back up, no matter how broken you feel. It's about reclaiming your life piece by piece and building something even stronger from the ruins. When I stood on the edge of my old life, teetering above the wreckage, I had two choices: collapse or fight. And I chose to fight. Not just for my finances, not just for my name, but for my dignity, for my freedom, for my future. If you're reading this, if you've ever been blindsided by betrayal, if you've ever had the ground ripped out from under you, I want you to remember something. You are not alone. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not too far gone to rise. Sometimes, walking away from what no longer serves you is not weakness. It's the greatest act of strength there is. And sometimes, the greatest victories aren't the ones that are loud and celebrated. They are the quiet ones. The ones where you close the door on the past, lock it behind you, and step, bloodied, battered but unbowed, into your future. This was my story. Now it's time for yours. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, or share your story. I read every single one. And if you want to hear more true stories of betrayal, survival, and triumph, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Because trust me, there's so much more to come. Until next time, stay strong, stay sharp, and never let anyone write your ending for you.